Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Super Coach Mates. Well, the final series is all done, which means it's time for silly season. We're gonna join in on the silly season stuff. What we're gonna do in today's video is we're going to do a review of the Carlton and Collingwood football clubs, how they went, where they need to improve for next year, and as well as perhaps looking at some super coach relevant players. I'm joined today as per normal by Thomas. How have you gone? How has your week been so far?
Yeah, not bad. Recovering post AFL season, I guess, but we obviously got a fair bit of content to pump out off season as well. I know my socials have been blowing up over the last 24 hours with regards to the St Kilda little bit of drama going on after our president decided to have a whack at the AFL. So I'll have
Yes.
a about that at the end, and was going to post about it, but decided to keep it towards the end of this episode to give my thoughts on it. But definitely an interesting kind of take on it, and it'd be interesting to see what happens moving forward. But yeah, definitely interesting. But we've got two clubs, two heavy hitters of the AFL to discuss. Carlton and Collingwood first up. I know club close to your heart, Collingwood. So hopefully the bias we put to one side for about 40 minutes. But Carlton as well, I know that someone invested into it with family involved in that as well. But kicking off straight off the bat, we've got Carlton's season review as we've got up here. They finished 8th. They lost against the Lions in elimination final. To be honest, they got pretty much embarrassed, but obviously they had their own off-field issues with injuries and never really got a full season together with players that they had on the park and they had available. They always had consistent injuries throughout the season, which made it difficult. I think at one point they had the biggest injury list in the AFL. Giving them a B+, I think that's maybe a little bit generous. What's your quick take on the Blue season for 2024?
I guess for me, I might be a bit harsher than that. I just think that the way they finished last season, I think this year was prime for them to make a grand final. Given where they finished last year, who they had on the list, but yeah, as you touched on, they just could not get any luck with injuries. And it's probably cost them dearly in the end because they just could not get any continuity on the park at all with any of their sort of real, I guess, players other than obviously Patrick Cripps, who was a runaway Brownlow medalist. Because he was basically the only one who could stay on the park for the whole season. All the others sort of crumbled around him. So, I think a B+ is probably generous to say the least. I
Yeah.
probably had them maybe a C-. But yeah, I guess being in the 8 for most of the year shows that they probably had they probably finished perhaps below where a lot of people thought they did, or thought they should have. So, it'd be interesting to see how they go next year.
Yeah, no, definitely it'd be interesting to see. I think it's do or die really with the list they have and the talent they have in that side. But moving on to Nath, that's something matter. This was obviously something we did over the final series, and Nathan's quite accurate with this sort of stuff. And hopefully, what we'll aim to give you across the next month of episodes is pretty much an insight into the statistical analysis of the clubs or each club in different categories. And hopefully, what you guys will gain out of it is a bit of an understanding. And I know I harp on it a fair bit, but I know a lot of advice from ourselves and other content creators is essentially when you're picking a side for Supercoach, you can do it on the eye test. So what I mean by that is you obviously look at the games and you make a decision based off what your gut feel is and what you see on television. But on the flip side of that, another whole kind of kettle of fish is actually looking at the statistics side of that. And, whereas a eyesight test is opinion based, this is more black and white because obviously stats are written in paper as much as you might agree with them or not. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the statistical side of it for each team was, and does that marry up with what we thought of the season from the eye test? So take it away, Nathan, and how did the Blues go with regards to that statistics?
Yeah, well, this is why when I was actually going through the stats, this is why I think Carlton perhaps a B plus is very generous for them. Given that a lot of their statistical stuff for the year is actually in the green, which means that they're top 6 for a lot of the stats that I've got here in front of my screen. So once again, looking at the stuff we did over the final series, so the big one for me is the turnover game. So they were top 2 in the turnover game, which historically is the biggest indicator of premiership success. So perhaps to finish 8th with the top 2 turnover game, perhaps is a little bit disappointing, given that this they had the system based so good from turnover both offensively and defensively, that they were able to basically challenge the best teams. So perhaps this is where the injury factor came in. So that's a massive tick for the system. That's a massive tick for the system at Carlton, especially off turnover. And obviously, when you think of Carlton, contested possession, clearances very strong at, again, top 6. The area that they were, I guess, leaky at, which we touched on throughout the year, was their ability to defend stoppages. Was bottom 6 in the AFL. I know that when Collingwood beat them earlier on in the year, I think they basically, it was a stoppage fest for Collingwood. I think they got most of their goals from stoppage. I don't have that in front of me. But I know all the guys at Champion Data throughout the whole year kept banging on about Carlton's ability to defend stoppages. Was among the worst in the AFL. So they themselves were very good at scoring from stoppage. But they were very poor at defending their own stoppage losses. So that's probably an area to improve on next year for Carlton, is their ability to actually defend their stoppage losses. And again, when they turn the ball over in their front half, they weren't able to defend the ground as well as some of the better sides did. So again, they were bottom 6 at that aspect. So that's basically when they turn the ball over in their own front half and the opposition go end to end. They were again bottom 6 at that. So that's a little bit of a a little bit of a concern for Carlton. So just some areas for them to have a look at. But yeah, otherwise for Carlton, there's a lot of green, a lot of yellow, which is obviously where you want to be. But yeah, so perhaps a little bit disappointing, just given that turnover profile. I don't know if they just straight away get that next year either. So perhaps that's why I was a little bit more critical of Carlton, just for that reason, because of that really strong turnover profile, especially after the home and away season, that they weren't able to capitalize on that.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think they're pretty keen on the off season to get some defenders in and hopefully potentially help that. It'd be interesting to see, because Carlton are probably in the same category as the Dogs and Dogs and Port Adelaide, I think, was off the top of my head. Yeah, where pretty much you've got elite midfielders going around, the cream of the crop, and they've just got deficiencies in specific areas which are really costing them. And obviously, Carlton identified potentially the defence is a problem. I've always been critical of their defence, so it'd be interesting to see how the statistics line up come, early next season when they've got a better health list on the track. But moving on to the trade ins and outs now, obviously, as the trade period hasn't officially opened yet, nothing's actually been confirmed. Hence, I've got the question marks put into place, as much as some players have already confirmed their destinations or their requests. So Dan Houston's one that interesting to get your take on, Nathan. How that actually helps Carlton. Does it help Carlton? Do you reckon Houston might actually go somewhere else? I know initially he's been a bit cryptic with regards to where he wants to be, whether it is Port Adelaide or it's Victoria. Nick Haynes was another one, a name that got popped up. He could be likely to go to Carlton. Laverde is another one that I guess is being thrown around. I know St Kilda's potential interest in him as a battle replacement. Matty Owie is the main out that's been listed potentially for the, to facilitate that Houston trade. It'd be interesting to see your thoughts on that. And Matt Kennedy was controversially subbed out in that elimination final to bring in De Koning. I think he's been pretty hard done by, and he's probably one that is a victim of that squeeze in the midfield where you can only fit so many midfielders in, and he's one that suffered because of it. I think he'd flourish in another club with his contested footy. What are your thoughts on those names there? And is there any one in particular that you think is the key for improving Carlton next season?
Well, I don't know if any of those are actually improving Carlton next season. To be perfectly frank with you, because I have a look at number 4 there, and I was bewildered when I found out a week or so ago that Carlton were contemplating not renewing Matt Owie's contract.
Yeah.
Given that basically all season, the number one knock on Carlton, other than their backline deficiencies, which we touched on, has been their ability to score through their small forwards. Given what we've seen with Brisbane this year, basically winning a premiership off small forwards, Collingwood winning their premiership off small forwards, Geelong winning their premierships off small forwards, that Carlton are then going to go and get rid of their best small forward, which I don't understand how that's meant to actually help them with premiership success, which is ultimately the aim of of all the clubs that they want premiership success. So to me, I don't know why they necessarily need Houston. I think they're pretty good for back half stocks. They've got Saad, they've got Nick Newman. So I don't know why they would really need Houston unless they plan on playing him higher up the ground through the wing. Nick Haynes and Laverde, well, I don't think they're going to get both of them. I think they could get one of them, but again, Nick Haynes is more of a halfback flanker, which they've already got Houston and Nick Newman. So I don't think he is a straight up start. And Jaden Laverde, well, I think the other one who you haven't mentioned on his Lewis Young, who's the other one who they've basically told to look elsewhere. So they're going to put their faith in Wiedering and Mitch McGovern, which, again, I don't have any issue with that. But I know late last year, 2023, I think Lewis Young was quite important for Carlton. So I think they probably just need to be a little bit careful in I guess, in what they do with with regards to Lewis Young, because I feel like that he is a very, very, I guess, serviceable backup for McGovern, especially given his injury history. And then Kennedy was a massive bombshell as well. I think he would do really well at Collingwood. I don't know if he himself would make that move, but I know after losing Taylor Adams, and then not having Tom Mitchell for most of the season probably really hurt our clearance and contested game. And when we touch on Collingwood, I think he would be someone who Collingwood could look at to perhaps provide a bit more support in that midfield grouping, just for that stuff, because he's got the forward craft as well. So I think he'd be a great fit at Collingwood, Kennedy. So some quite strange, I guess, list decisions coming up for Carlton, especially with regards to what they do with their best small forward. But obviously, we're just looking at this from the outside in. But it was a bit, I guess, bizarre seeing that that Owies was on the out for me. That's probably the main takeaway from this.
Yeah, I think Houston's an interesting one because the reason I was critical of Carlton's defence was the lack of one-on-one defenders they have. So you look at Doherty when he's fit, Sard, obviously, what's his name? The running halfback from GWS that got traded. I've completely forgotten him. Not Nick
Newman.
Newman as well. Zach Williams, that's the one. He was the one
Zach
that was
Williams.
translated or transferred into a forward or small forward and seems to be training like that. And he seems to be doing all right as a small forward. But yeah, you got Nick Newman, who's a running halfback. Sard's a running halfback. And Doherty's a running halfback, and they really struggle with one-on-one key defenders. You look at the best teams going around, and Brisbane's one of them. You got Starcevic, who's a one-on-one defender. Leicester's a one-on-one defender. You got a lot of good clubs there that have key one-on-one small defenders, and I think that Carlton don't really have that, and that's where they kind of lack in their defensive line. Houston's a very good defender, don't get me wrong, and he's got a really good right boot, but I would be not surprised if they do get him that he basically plays midfield for them as a bit of a defensive midfielder. That's my guess. Gets put, as you said, gets pushed on a wing, put in the midfield. So it'd be interested to see what happens. I was surprised as well. He just seems like a barometer for the Blues. When he does well, Blues do well. Be interested to see where he goes if he does get traded. But yeah, I think time will tell with regards to that one. But moving forward to our player focus. So this is basically one player that we both think will have an impact moving into 2025 and someone that you should be considering for your Supercoach Classics or draft, whatever you play. And that is Elijah Hollins. He was actually, having watched only a handful of Carlton games, he was actually quite impressive every time he played. Probably wasn't rubber stamped his credentials as a selection for Classic just with his consistency and lack of best 22 performances. But whenever he plays, he seems to be super important for the actual structure. He seems to free up Walsh and Cripps. He does a lot of hard unwarded running to get the ball into the hands of Cripps and Walsh, and does have a goal threat as well. His best score was 116 Supercoach points versus the Kangaroos back in round 3. 22 disposals, 1 goal, 6 inside 50s. He's, ridiculously dangerous going inside 50 as well. I think the biggest question for you, Nathan, is can he maintain that consistency in a team that is pretty stacked with talent, especially if they do get a Houston of the like to really shape up that mix? Do you think he can maintain that consistency moving forward to next year?
Well, the reason why I picked Elijah Hollins was the player I actually had for this. Unfortunately, got delisted, which was David Cunningham, who just is. Carlton supporters rate him very, very highly, Cunningham, but he just could not get a run at it, which I think unfortunately was why he got delisted. But the reason why I think Elijah Hollins might be perhaps in this is I can see him playing more midfield minutes next year. I know that in the preseason, obviously he had the white powder scandal, I think it was, up on the Gold Coast when he was in court. And he escaped with, I think it was a good behaviour bond or a small fine he had to pay. So there's no doubt that probably impacted him, especially in the off season. But to his credit, when he came in here, as you touched on, he was a bit of important player for Carlton. But one of the, things that I noticed throughout the year was that they perhaps lacked a little bit of leg speed through that midfield. So that's why I think Elijah Hollins is a bit of a watch, because I feel like that he's got the speed to be able to perhaps fix a lot of that midfield deficiency.
Mm-hmm.
But the only caveat on that is, obviously, you've said the consistency part. I do feel like that one of the other players who they delisted was Jack Martin, who sort of played like, a bit of a Jamie Elliott role where he's a leading mark forward. So I don't know if Carlton plan on putting Hollins more into that type of role. So I guess if he is in that type of role, he's probably a hard avoid.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was sort of the one that I had a look at going through a lot of his stats. Where I think he's at the age where he's ready to make a big jump. It's just whether or not he stays in his current role or he can push up into the midfield, and perhaps be that, I guess, running speed player that they need.
Yeah, I think he's going to be crucial for that link and carry. Walsh is one that did it in the past, but he's now playing more centre bounce attendances and playing more as a contested midfielder. So yeah, I think he's one that is crucial to create that space for the Blues. Playing on the G as well in those wide expanses, I think is really important. But yeah, he's one to watch over preseason if he can. He has the capabilities of getting to potentially a high 2-figure, 3-figure average. Obviously, different story if he's midfield only eligible and makes it hard to pick him, but he's one that definitely has the ability to get those high consistent scores. I think it's just that consistency and actually maintaining a spot in the best 22 moving forward. But moving on to your favourite boys, Nath. Now, obviously, if you've graded them a C minus, the Blues, I'm interested to see what you're realistically grading Collingwood without a bias. But yeah, 2024 ladder position was 9th. Best result was, I believe, a 1-point win against the Lions in round 23, obviously the eventual premiers. They were obviously a side, Nathan can obviously go well in depth with this, but they were a side kind of little with injuries as well. Probably had, what we call a premiership hangover with the fact they never really got going at the start. They had injuries throughout, similar to Carlton, which were never really be able to hold down. I believe that with McStay being fully fit next year, that's going to be a really important factor for you guys to bounce back into finals contention. What's your quick summary of the Pies, having watched the majority of their games, obviously, live?
Yeah, I think that sums it up perfectly. Unfortunately, just couldn't get their best players, their most important structural players on the park for long enough in the season. And yeah, unfortunately, yeah, the better players outside of the GOAT himself, Nick Dacos, probably all unfortunately regressed from where they were last year, which we'll touch on in the stats. So yeah, I think yeah, I probably gave us a C. Just because I didn't get carried away with all this back-to-back stuff. I said more, let's get back to prelim week and then see from there. Obviously, we didn't get back to prelim week. I'll be honest with you, it probably was going to be a D or a D minus until the last sort of 6 weeks. When they really did come home with a bit of a rush. They beat Brisbane there. They pushed Sydney all the way. And yeah, they sort of won most of their end games, which means they've got a good platform to build into next year. So I'm hoping with a clean run next year, that we can sort of bounce back up, sort of a bit like what Geelong did this year.
Yeah, no, I think you guys are definitely one to watch to rebound quite quickly. Obviously, no Victorian teams in the grand final. This was probably the first time in a little bit that there were 2 interstate teams. But yeah, one that has the MCG rocking on most nights. And I think as of watching footy in Melbourne, they're sorely missed in finals, as much as it pains me to say, because it brings in the crowds and the atmosphere, and I think they'll be heavy to bounce back next season, having just won the premiership last year. But moving on to your stats, this will be interesting to hear, because obviously from the eye test, they look like they really struggled to get anything going in the first half of the season, really, and it really was only portions in the season where they got their footy together. Obviously, some quite impressive wins, but a lot of the stuff that transpired was, I think, you look at last year and you guys won a predominant amount of games by under 10 points or two goals or less essentially. How do the stats line up to this season? Obviously, not the season you hope for, but do the underlying stats say otherwise?
Well, the underlying stats say that they were a mid-table team, which is where they finished. So, yeah, they still maintain that ability to win close games. I think they were 6-1 or 7-1 in games by under 10 points. So they still have that going for them. But unfortunately for Collingwood, what happened? Basically, they got disarmed this year in terms of their ability to move the ball from the back half. So last year, so 2023, they were number one at scoring from back half, from the back half, which is why they were this awesome team to watch, because the ball was always in motion. They were moving the ball quickly, but they were punishing from there. But that basically got disarmed. So last year they were number one at scoring from back half, and this year they dropped into the bottom six. So that basically tells me they got disarmed with their ability to move the ball. And then they when they did turn the ball over in their own front half, they were a bit leaky at getting the ball. They were very, I guess, sliced open. Which I will put the caveat on. I know I said for Carlton, but that was actually, so the Carlton front half stuff. So that was actually Carlton turning the ball over in their own front half that they were then bottom six at defending. So that's just a disclaimer there. So for Collingwood, they were bottom six at when they turned the ball over in their own front half, then the opposition taking the ball from one end of the ground to the other. They were bottom six at defending that transition. So that's really where Collingwood got disarmed at. They got disarmed with their ability to move the ball. And then when they did turn the ball over in their own front half, so Collingwood's forward 50 area, they got, I guess, picked apart going back the other way, which does happen with premiers. They do get picked apart, especially defensively. So again, they were bottom six for that. So obviously, when we go through a lot of the stats, obviously Richmond, North Melbourne, West Coast are going to be, bottom three in a lot of them. But basically, Geelong were also bottom six at that, and Essendon were bottom six at that sort of defending scores when they turn the ball over in their sort of that half forward wedge area and then going back the other way on them. So that is I guess where Collingwood fell down, but where they did actually improve this year was because the back half game got taken away from them. Their ability to actually score from front half was among the best in the AFL. So I did a comparison on last year versus this year, just to see, because this was the main reason why, because Collingwood's whole, I guess, scoring profile flipped from the back half to the front half, because that, I guess, back half game got taken away from them. So then they had to flip to a front half team. So again, they were top six at this. In fact, they were fifth for scores from front half. So that is a positive. But yeah, obviously, a lot of the other areas, they didn't fall away by much, but it was enough to make them, I guess, this premier side to just drop back to a middle table side. So in a statistical sense, they regressed back to the mean from where they were, which was up here, and then regressing back to the mean sort of means they just, get back to where everyone else was. So that was pretty much the story of Collingwood here. Which is why I'm hoping with a clean injury run that perhaps we can get a lot of these stats that I'm looking at here back up into the green.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think bit of a reality check for the Pies, considering that, as I said last year, there were a lot of close games that could have gone either way. That's a different story if you lose them, but I think it's always a good thing when you're brought back down to reality and definitely not out of it by any means. But you go back on the trade table, have an easy draw next year and things like that, and hopefully things change for the better for 2025. But moving on to some ins and outs that were reported in the trade period so far. Perryman's basically an in. I know I've got a question mark there, but it's now been confirmed that he's requested a trade over. He's exercised his unrestricted free agency rights, which I think is a really good get for you guys. Will help the likes of Dacos, De Goey, Perriman's a hardball midfielder. I think that's what you need exactly. James Peatling's an interesting one. I know St Kilda's playing hardball to get him as well. About a dozen, majority of the Victorian clubs are interested in him, considering how well he did in the grand final. I'd be surprised if he got both, but I also wouldn't be surprised considering both of them are Giants players. Tomlinson, he's also attracted interest from St Kilda, but he probably meets a defensive need for you guys to some degree. I don't think he's more depth than anything, I'd say. John Noble, obviously, on the outer. And Joe Richards, I think, is one that surprised me a little bit when I heard his name being thrown around as trade bait, but I don't know if that will eventuate. What are your thoughts on those trades? And is there anyone that I think as a fan you would like to see other than Perryman, or you're surprised that is on the outer?
No, I think Perryman does feel a bit of a void for us. Obviously, side bottom is getting on a bit. And I think I don't know if you saw, but the last few games he actually played as a tagger.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's sort of side bottom's role, because the one thing he hasn't actually lost is his running capacity across the ground. He's probably not as quick as he once was, but he still has a great running capacity. So I wonder if they're planning on putting Perryman out on the wing. I guess, and playing him in side bottom's role to allow side bottom to sort of transition more into that, I guess, tagging type player. Tomlinson, I think, does fill a void. And this is why I guess I was disappointed we missed out on Tom Duday last year. Because I think Collingwood was still planning on Nathan Murphy to play a lot of this year. And then obviously when he was forced to medically retire, I think that perhaps had a massive impact on a lot of those, I guess, defensive numbers that I highlighted there. So I think Tomlinson to come in and perhaps be the Darcy Moore, I guess, offspringer would make sense from a Collingwood perspective. The Peatling stuff, I have to be honest, the Peatling and the Tomlinson one, I haven't heard much discussion around those two. I think a lot of our focus has been on Perryman, which I think as of Monday, the 1st of October, that I think he said he was going to join Collingwood. Obviously, I think he grew up a Collingwood supporter. So that's probably a good get. Noble, I think he's requested back to the Gold Coast for family reasons. Obviously you can't begrudge that. I think that deal just gets done. And I don't think Collingwood are actually pushing Joe Richards out. I think it's more that Port Adelaide have offered him significant money on a long-term deal that I guess has got him thinking in two minds. But I know as of the 1st of October, I think Collingwood have upped their offer to a 3-year contract with about the same money that Port Adelaide are paying. So obviously as of the 1st of October, I know today's obviously we're recording this on the 2nd of October, but he's yet to make up his mind. So I hope he does stay, because I think he will get a lot more games next year, just given the energy that he provides. And the fact that he's a mature ager as well, I think helps in that case. So, I think the Perryman one's the main one for Collingwood, and then it's sort of just, I guess, see with the other two. I would like to try and get Tomlinson in, just as a bit of a, I guess, thing to help the back line out. But yeah, obviously I think Perryman's the main one for me, and I do hope that Richard stays. But if he chooses to go, well, I guess that's his decision.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I guess moving forward to the next slide there. Whoops. The player focus. So Ed Allen. Before we touch on that, I guess it'd be interesting to see what happens come the off season, and if you do get any other players in, and what those outs look like, because obviously Noble and Joe Richards was one. Probably there was getting more consistent games in Noble, but it'd be interesting to see what happens moving forward. But Ed Allen, so. He's one that I don't really know about, so you're going to have to give me a bit of insight of him as a player and how he's actually played. He hasn't played much, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, it was one sub game and then played that full game versus the D's in the last game of the round. Did score very well, 94 Supercoach points, 21 disposals, 6 tackles, 3 clearances. I'm not sure if his price does change at all because he didn't play enough games. I don't exactly know how that works, or he does get a price increase for 2025. But do you reckon as a Pies supporter he can break into that best 22, or do you think there are question marks regards to his job security, or do you think because he's been given a contract that he can push into that best 22 and show what he's made of? Because clearly against the D's, obviously that was a bit of a null and void game. He did have a very good game.
Yeah, well, player-wise, think Patrick Cripps, but an endurance beast. That's basically what Ed Allen is. So I know people internally at Collingwood have said perhaps he can play on the wing, a bit like Mason Wood down at St Kilda there, where he's sort of a taller winger. But yeah, he does feel an immediate void for Collingwood. They probably do need big body midfielders. I know that Finn McRae has been hyped up a lot, but I think at least based on what I saw in that final game, I think Ed Allen has well and truly gone past Finn McRae for that role. I just think that if there's, again, I'm looking at this from one perspective. If there's one perspective from Collingwood that they had to sort of, I guess, figure out what to do, it was their contested possession and clearance stuff. I guess that's why they got Tom Mitchell into the club at the start of last year to help with that clearance and contested possession stuff. So with him not being there, and then Taylor Adams also choosing to leave, it basically left that area of the ground. And then DeGoey obviously being in and out for most of the year. It left that area of the ground particularly, I guess, vulnerable. Which when you score from the front half, you generally need to win clearance and contested possession to generally set up that front half scoring game. So when you don't win that, and then the game's being played in your back half, and you can't move the ball like they did last year, it's probably easy to see why perhaps where they finished where they did. So yeah, I think Ed Allen feels an immediate void. I guess that is the question: is what if Tom Mitchell comes back, which I would presume he does come back in. I don't know if that means that Ed Allen probably doesn't get a game, but I feel like out of all the youngsters Collingwood's got, he's the one who I think is probably most likely to break in, just given what Collingwood need. But then I guess the other caveat on that too is that Craig McRae said that he wants players and not draft picks. So I think McRae's made his focus clear. I guess at some stage Ed Allen's going to break out. It's just going to be whether it's next year or the year after. But I know Collingwood have huge raps on him since he came into the club. And they sort of made him wait his time. But I feel like, yeah, if there's one of these Collingwood players who can break out, it's probably going to be Ed Allen.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do agree with that. I think from the game, I think I'm pretty sure I watched that game live against
the Melbourne game. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was very impressive, I know, as I said, it was a bit of an null and void game for finals and whatever, but I think he's shown enough potential in that game, and he's played enough on played on a big stage of the G. I think he's more than capable. But before we wrap it up, just wanted to tie back to what I was saying at the start, and I'll be interested to see what your opinion is, Nathan, about this issue, because I know it's been blown up essentially viral on social media in the last 24 hours, and that's regard to what our president, Andrew Bassat, said. Let me just bring up, hang on. But he's basically said it was out on our best and fairest night 2 nights ago, I'm pretty sure. And I don't know if you've seen the clip yourself, but with regards to the father-son picks and things like that, and basically saying that teams should be paying a premium to get those father-son picks across the line. And he's obviously alluding to Levi Ashcroft. And you look at Richmond coming dead last and the deficiencies they had with injuries and hypothetically speaking, with Levi Ashcroft coming number 1 in the draft, if you pay it by the books and number 1 draft pick goes to the lowest performing club and father son out the door, he goes to Richmond. Richmond get a really good midfielder, ready-made midfielder for AFL that will definitely help their club, no doubt, with Shai Bolton and Jack Graham and the like leaving. But instead, he goes to the premiership winning team because of a father-son pick. What are your thoughts on this issue? And just before I continue, just to clarify, I know a lot of the stuff on social media that's been said, and I know it's the classic St Kilda talk about, St Kilda could have got Petrarca and Bontempelli and whatever in the draft. And I understand where they're coming from. But this, if you actually watch the whole clip of Bassat, what he's saying, it's got nothing to do with the draft. And I think they're well aware that they stuffed up in regards to all the draft selection and all that was kind of butched around that time, but he's not actually alluding to that. He's alluding to the father-son picks. What are your thoughts on that as a Collingwood supporter? And do you reckon it's fair that clubs like Brisbane, for example, or having those father-son picks where they're getting these ready-made AFL players because of talent and relations to other Brisbane Lions players in this regard, get them for free, and then teams like Richmond miss out?
Yeah, so I will start off. So no, I haven't seen the whole video, but I did hear Bassat make comments about the father-son. I guess for me, I guess every team has their yeah, I guess every team has their thorns in the shoes, if you will. So I just feel like if St Kilda actually benefited from the father-son system, I don't think Bassat makes those comments at all. I just think it's a bit of a I guess handshake agreement between the 18 clubs, or at least the ones who do entertain the father-son picks. I know that the Camporeale boys have been discussed as well. And obviously Collingwood with Nick Dacos and Josh Dacos and Tom McGuan next year. Geelong have benefited with, Ablett. So I feel like it's a bit of a handshake agreement with regards to father-sons that the club sort of that they sort of it's sort of a case of, well, we won't pick on your father-son if you pick on ours, if that sort of makes sense. It's a bit of a gentleman's agreement, which I think it's a great tradition, personally myself, that that the sons of players should be able to go to the same clubs that their fathers or mothers when we get into that played at. I just think that that's something unique to the AFL, and I know people always complain and tell me that we're Americanizing the game, but I guess this makes it unique in that it allows, I guess, tradition to continue. It allows, I guess, a family legacy to continue to build up. That I just think if you take it away from clubs, and at the end of the day, there's absolutely nothing stopping Levi Ashcroft. So let's hypothetically say the father-son's not in there. So Richmond pick up Levi Ashcroft with the number 1 pick. Oh, there's hypothetically nothing stopping him in 12 months saying, I want to go to Brisbane anyway.
Yeah.
And then you waste all that time and effort recruiting, drafting, training for someone who doesn't really want to be there, but because they're the best player in the draft and they were eligible to go to another club as a father-son anyway, that they end up just wasting 12 months of their lives at the club just to go back to where they were anyway. So that's why I think there's sort of the gentleman's agreement that clubs, I guess, they're willing to sacrifice, let the father-son slip a little bit, for the sake of, I guess, keeping that tradition alive. And there's no doubt that this does benefit the older, more established clubs. But then I guess it's the same with the academy picks, which again I'm all for the academy picks, especially for those northern teams, because they don't have the same, I guess, the same, I guess, go home factor, if you will. So allowing them access to players who they've had at the club for 3 or 4 years and develop them, and then to allow them to basically be recruited as per a father son.
Yeah.
I think it's probably their way of saying that, where we don't have the father sons, but we're going to, be allowed to develop our own players. I think Gold Coast last year sort of irked a lot of people, but I think that was more of a one-off, if I'm being honest. I know they had 4 really strong academy players, but I don't think they've got anywhere near that same talent coming through this year. So, I guess, I guess for St Kilda, because they haven't really benefited from father son, they probably don't really. I think they probably whinge, or I shouldn't say whinge, but their comments are probably understandable.
Yeah.
But I just think that it's a great tradition, and I think it does allow family legacies to keep building at one club, as opposed to, say, Richmond, who did finish on the bottom, for them to get Levi Ashcroft, and then for him to turn around 12 months later and say, "Well, I want to go back to Brisbane."
Yeah.
I just think that doing it that way makes it much better than just basically saying that you've got to go to Richmond when you can have a club nominate him, and there's actually nothing stopping the clubs from. So there's nothing actually stopping Richmond putting pick 1 on Brisbane for Levi Ashcroft anyway. There's actually nothing stopping them doing that.
Yeah.
I think the main concern with the clubs is the 20% discount that they get for it. I think that's the part that perhaps Bassat was more getting at, more than actually the player themselves. So I think that might get looked at going forward, is what sort of discount do clubs get, if any, with regards to these academy picks, or their father sons. But to completely scrap it, I think is just a massive disservice.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting conversation. I know, well, we can't talk to the full extent because obviously I know St Kilda had the NGA prospects in Owens and Windhague, which clubs couldn't really touch, so we got them for a discounted price and where they realistically would have gone in the draft. But it's an interesting conversation because, as you said, you look at what your conversation was around. Having like a Levi Ashcroft go to Richmond and then 12 months later he goes to Brisbane anyway because of the want to play for the club. But I guess on the flip side, and the devil's advocate, is essentially if he does go to Richmond and he's contracted to Richmond for 2 years or whatever, Brisbane have to pay a price to get him off Richmond's books. So I understand where you're coming from with the discount and all that, but it's definitely an interesting conversation to have. And I guess it's exacerbated by the fact that Ashcroft's walk through the door to a premiership winning side is basically a replacement for Neil when he retires, and the Lions continue their dominance in the midfield. So, and then you look at Richmond, who's suffered serious injuries all throughout the season. You just feel a little bit sorry for them that they miss out on such exciting talent, as much as Ashcroft doesn't want to be there. Probably. We don't know that. Like, most players are pretty grateful to whatever club they go to. I mean, Horn Francis was a bit of a difference there with the kind of mess that turned out at North Melbourne, but North benefited from that trade, I think, as well. They didn't miss out. So the conversation comes back to the fact that if, Ashcroft did go to Richmond and, 12 months later he does want to go to Brisbane because of the heritage and the legacy, I think that legacy still stands if he gets there, and Richmond get a benefit from trading a contracted player out to Brisbane. But yeah, definitely interesting conversation. I know, as a St Kilda supporter, it was definitely an interesting take, and I think probably the first time in a while that, and I guess fans have reacted negatively to this, or not necessarily St Kilda fans, but AFL fans in general, because it seems a bit petty, it seems a bit complaining and whinging considering St Kilda don't have the best tracker when it comes to trade period itself. But it's nice to see the club take a stand and a very firm stance and a belief in what they think is right. I know there was another conversation. This is another entire conversation to have on another day with regards to Josh Battle not getting invited to the best and fairest.
I think that's the stuff they should more be worrying about rather than, other stuff.
I think that was, I even saw someone post on Facebook that apparently Steele in his speech didn't acknowledge Battle. I don't know what happened there. That's another, as I said, a kettle of fish. That maybe there was something that happened behind closed doors that we're not aware about. That, there was, I know Battle was basically very content at the end of the season where he was with St Kilda, and it was almost the fact that it was felt that at the end of the day, money talked more and he was happy to go to Hawthorn, but definitely there's been a bit of a fallout there, and potentially there's something that's gone sour with regards to the relationships between the club and Battle. But definitely one to see what happens. It'd be interesting to see when St Kilda do play on Hawthorn. But I think it all boiled down to, at the end of the day, the frustrations of St Kilda potentially getting a second round pick or whatever for Battle, as much as I don't think Battle's worth a top 5 pick or whatever, when you look at the essence of the trade and the Battle as a player. And I think St Kilda were pretty desperate to get a first round pick off that Battle leaving. And I know he came third in the best and fairest. Obviously, he's highly regarded in the club. But yeah, definitely a lot of water under the bridge. But it's nice to see as a supporter, I think, if we take all the controversy and, debate outside of it, St Kilda's been a club, I think, in the grand scheme of things, that gets easily pushed over and, doesn't put up much of a fuss when it comes to this sort of stuff, and has obviously internally stuffed up a few things, but it's nice to see a very firm direction that they want to go to. And be interested to see what happens next year. But that's all we got time for today. Next week, I'm just going to bring up the agenda now. So next week, we should be talking about Adelaide and Port Adelaide, definitely two teams that are unfortunately on either side of the spectrum in season 2024, with Port bowing out in the prelim and Adelaide having a very disappointing season. But I think come next year, both those teams in South Australia can really push to final. So definitely an interesting conversation to be had there with the likes of Houston, the Houston News, and whether or not, I'm assuming that gets sorted out or close to sorting out by next week. But you'll be interesting to see what happens there with the two teams from the South. But other than that, have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the off season. And if you're in a team that's got trade period or is heavily invested in the trade period, enjoy that. And we'll see you for the next one.